stood on the outskirts of Black Hollow, forgotten by time. Once a place of worship, it had been abandoned for decades, its stained glass windows shattered, its wooden pews covered in thick layers of dust. The people of the town spoke of strange happenings inside, whispers in the night, the tolling of a bell that had long since rusted silent, and figures moving in the shadows. No one dared step inside after dark. But Ethan Moore didn't believe in ghost stories. As a journalist, he sought truth, not superstition. When he heard the rumors about the church, he saw it as the perfect opportunity for an article. With only a flashlight and a digital recorder, he set off to uncover the mystery. The night was colder than expected as Ethan made his way up the worn stone steps of the church. The wooden doors, weathered by years of neglect, stood slightly ajar, as if inviting him inside. A musty, decaying scent drifted from within, making him hesitate. He shook off the unease and stepped forward, pushing the doors open with a creaking groan that echoed through the hollow structure. The air inside was thick, stagnant. His flashlight's beam cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of empty pews stretching toward the altar. The ceiling loomed high above, its wooden beams twisted and blackened with age. Dust swirled in the air, disturbed by his presence. "All right," Ethan muttered, clicking on his recorder. "This is Ethan Moore, reporting from inside St. Augustine Church. The atmosphere is eerie, but so far, nothing unusual." As he moved forward, his footsteps seemed unnaturally loud against the cracked stone floor. The sound of his breathing filled the vast emptiness. He glanced around, half expecting to see someone, or something, watching him from the shadows. Then, he heard it. A faint whisper, like the wind through the trees, yet unmistakably human. He froze, his pulse quickening. The whisper was soft at first, just a single word that he couldn't make out. Then it came again, clearer this time. "Leave." Ethan's breath hitched. He swung his flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing, just empty pews and dust. He swallowed hard, forcing a chuckle. "Probably just the wind," he said aloud, as if to reassure himself. But the air inside was still. There was no wind. Shaking off the creeping unease, he continued toward the altar. He had come too far to turn back now. As he reached the front of the church, he noticed an old tattered Bible resting on the pulpit, its pages yellowed and curled. He reached out to touch it. A deafening crash echoed through the church. Ethan spun around, his heart pounding. One of the pews had tipped over on its own. His flashlight flickered, and the whispering returned, louder this time, overlapping voices murmuring in an eerie chorus. He gritted his teeth, lifting his recorder. "If there's someone here, show yourself," he called, trying to keep his voice steady. The only response was the creaking of the wooden beams above. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw a movement. His flashlight trembled in his grip as he turned it toward the pews. They weren't empty anymore. Figures sat in the rows, shrouded in darkness. Their heads were bowed as if in prayer, their hands resting motionless on their laps. Ethan's breath came in short, panicked bursts. He stumbled backward, nearly dropping his recorder. The figures didn't move, but he could feel their hollow eyes fixed on him. The whispers grew into a rising chant, a low, droning sound that filled the air. The church seemed to close in around him, the darkness thickening like ink. He turned, running for the doors, but they slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. The chanting stopped. A heavy silence fell, pressing against his ears. Then a single voice spoke, a deep, raspy whisper that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Kneel." Ethan's legs buckled beneath him, as if unseen hands had forced him down. His flashlight rolled across the floor, its beam flickering wildly. Shadows stretched across the walls, twisting unnaturally. He gasped, struggling to move, but his body refused to obey. Cold fingers brushed against his neck, his arms, his face. A pressure built in his chest, suffocating him. His vision blurred, darkness creeping at the edges. Through the haze, he saw the altar change. The wooden cross that once stood tall was now twisted, splintered, wrong. A figure stood behind it, tall, skeletal, its face obscured by a tattered hood. Its elongated fingers reached toward him. The whispering returned, this time inside his head, filling his mind with words he couldn't understand. He felt his thoughts slipping away, his identity dissolving like mist. The final toll of the church bell rang. The next morning, the town awoke to silence. The sun cast long shadows over St. Augustine Church. The doors stood ajar, just as they had the night before. But Ethan Moore was gone. Inside, his flashlight lay on the stone floor, still flickering weakly. His recorder was found near the altar, the last recording filled with static and a single whispered phrase. He stays with us now. To this day, no one enters St. Augustine Church after dark. But sometimes on quiet nights, a lone bell tolls. And if you listen closely, you might hear the whispers of those who never left.